My name is Carolyn Sanders. I'm 59 and I lost my husband last fall. Cancer took him fast, the kind of fast that leaves you still setting a place for him at dinner, even when the table's already cleared. We were together for 33 years, built a home in Greensboro, raised a daughter, shared morning coffee and late-night silence. After he passed, the house felt hollow, like a museum full of echoes, so I sold it. I thought moving in with Emily would soften the ache. She's my only child, my reason for everything, and she offered her guest room like it was nothing. Said she and her husband Brad would be happy to have me. I wanted to believe it. I packed the memories that mattered, donated the rest, and made the long drive to Austin with a heart full of hope and an overnight bag of grief. I told myself this was just a new chapter. The first few days were quiet. Brad kept to himself, and Emily was busy with work, but I didn't mind. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, tried not to be in the way. I reminded myself I was lucky that this was family. But there was a shift, subtle at first. Brad would roll his eyes when I spoke. He'd leave the room when I entered. Sometimes I caught him staring, not in a curious way, but like he was measuring how long I'd stay. Emily didn't notice, or maybe she chose not to. She'd smile and nod, say things were fine. I started hearing the word temporary more often than welcome. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't home. I was tolerated. And when someone tolerates you, it's only a matter of time before they start counting how much space you take up. At first, I told myself it was just adjustment. A new rhythm, new walls, new habits. I was living in their world now, and I needed to make myself small. I stayed in the guest room, mostly reading or folding laundry that wasn't mine. I kept the kitchen clean, made dinner most nights, even offered to run errands when they got busy. I thought maybe if I stayed useful, I'd feel needed. But slowly, the air began to change. Brad never looked at me when I spoke, just grunted or stared at his phone. He'd switch off the show I was watching mid-episode without saying a word, and once he turned the thermostat up while I was shivering in a sweater. Emily noticed, I know she did. But she'd just smile and say he was tired. Work was stressful, that I shouldn't take it personally. So I swallowed my hurt and nodded, pretending it didn't sting. It was the little things that made the biggest noise. The way Brad left the room when I entered it. The way Emily only hugged me sideways now, like she wasn't sure how long she wanted to stay close. The way their conversations shifted when I walked in like I was an outsider in my own daughter's home. Then came the night I stopped pretending. I had made chicken pot pie, Brad's favorite. I set the table, poured the wine, lit a candle, like I used to for Sunday dinners back home. We ate in silence. Emily was scrolling through her phone, Brad sipping his beer with that distant look in his eyes. I thought maybe they were tired, maybe I was reading too much into it. But then Brad put his fork down. He looked up at Emily first, then at me. His voice was sharp, flat, and far too calm. He said maybe it was time we stopped pretending this was temporary. That they weren't running a charity. My hands froze around my napkin. I didn't understand. Then he said it. That they had bills. That I wasn't working. That they didn't sign up to feed an extra mouth. I turned to Emily, my heart thudding like a drum I couldn't quiet. I waited for her to speak, to say something, anything. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just mumbled that maybe it would be better if I found something more stable. For everyone's sake. Everyone's sake. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't say a word. I just stood, nodded once, and walked down the hallway to the guest room. I packed 2 suitcases. That's all I had left of my life. A couple of sweaters, a photo album, a pair of shoes I barely wore anymore. I moved slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel everything. When I wheeled the bags to the door, neither of them followed. Brad didn't look up from the TV. Emily stood by the sink, arms crossed, head down. No one said goodbye. The night air hit me like a wave. I stood outside their building under the yellow porch light, bags at my feet, hands shaking. I looked up once at the window, but the curtain didn't move. So I sat on the curb and waited. For what I don't know. Maybe for the ache in my chest to fade. Maybe just for the strength to stand up again. The motel smelled like cigarette smoke and something sour beneath the carpet. The wallpaper curled at the edges, and the heater rattled like it was trying to shake itself free from the wall. I laid there the first night with my coat still on, staring at the water stain on the ceiling like it might offer answers. I didn't cry right away. Not until the second night, when the vending machine ate my last dollar and the man at the front desk told me to jiggle the buttons like it was supposed to help. I went back to my room and cried into a towel so no one would hear through the thin walls. There wasn't much left to unpack. Just 2 suitcases and a cardboard box I had shoved in the trunk at the last minute. I sat on the floor, legs crossed, pulling out what little was left of my life. A framed photo of my wedding day. A Christmas ornament Emily made in preschool. A pair of knit gloves I hadn't worn in years. At the bottom of the box, buried under a faded dish towel, was something I didn't remember packing. A small leather-bound book with a frayed ribbon sticking out the side. I ran my fingers over the cover, the way you touch something that feels out of place and too familiar all at once. It was my mother's handwriting on the front page. Neat, delicate loops in blue ink, just like the notes she used to leave in my lunchbox when I was a girl. I hadn't seen the diary in decades. Maybe never opened it. I didn't even know I had kept it. I sat there with it in my lap, listening to the buzzing light above me and the occasional thud from the room next door. Something in my chest tightened as I flipped to the first page. I wasn't expecting answers. I wasn't expecting anything at all. I just needed to feel close to something that used to feel like home. Most of the entries were ordinary at first. Grocery lists, weather notes, frustrations about neighbors, and church potlucks. I kept reading, not sure what I was looking for, only knowing I wasn't ready to stop. Then, buried in the middle, the handwriting shifted. The words grew heavier, the tone more careful. He came again today, said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. But he has a name to protect. She must never know. I read it twice, then again. My hands started to tremble. She wasn't talking about my father, the man I had always believed raised me. She was talking about someone else entirely. Entry after entry pieced it together. A man with power. Oil money. Promises made in secret. He left cash on the counter when she refused to ask for anything. His initials always signed at the bottom of notes she taped inside the pages. W.J.S. I said the letters out loud without thinking. William J. Sterling. The name hit me like a stone in the chest. I had seen it before. On headlines, billboards, company trucks when I was a girl. I thought he was just another rich man from Texas. I never imagined I shared his blood. Toward the end of the entries, she mentioned a lawyer. A Mr. Goldstein. She wrote that he had promised to keep something safe. Not officially. Not in any will. But for me. Just in case. My breath caught. I looked around the motel room like I might wake up, and it would all disappear. But it didn't. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy. Not even anger. Something closer to possibility. Leonard Goldstein's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building tucked behind a bookstore in Dallas. The windows were dusty, and the sign on the door was faded, but something about it felt solid. Like whatever was inside had weathered time and secrets both. He opened the door himself. An older man, thin, slow-moving, but his eyes were sharp and full of recognition the moment I said my mother's name. He didn't ask many questions, just led me inside and closed the door behind us like we were about to open something sacred. He slid a yellowed envelope across the desk. My full name was written on it in thick ink. I stared at it for a moment, afraid to touch it, afraid it might crumble, or worse, mean nothing. But when I opened it and saw the first line, I knew who he was. He admitted it all. The affair, the regret, the silence. He said he had always intended to leave something behind for me. Not out of guilt, but because he loved me in the only quiet way he knew how. When Leonard handed me the second folder, my breath caught in my chest. Inside were account numbers, trust documents, titles. The kind of paperwork that changes a life. A portfolio worth over $1 million. No publicity. No press. Just mine. I didn't speak for a long time. I just sat there with the envelope in my lap and tears quietly slipping down my face. Not because I was rich, but because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel discarded. I felt chosen. I wasn't just the woman left on the curb. I was the woman someone had quietly fought for all along. I didn't rush. Power, I was learning, doesn't come from speed. It comes from knowing exactly where to place your next step while everyone else is still watching the last one. I stayed in Dallas for a while, keeping to myself in a modest rental. I spent my days watching online tutorials about property management and investing. At night, I took notes like I was back in school this time with something to prove and nothing to lose. I bought a laptop, opened accounts, registered an LLC under a quiet name. Sia's Property Group. It meant nothing to anyone but me. I ordered business cards, joined forums, listened more than I spoke. There's something liberating about becoming someone new when no one is looking. My wardrobe changed next. Not flashy, not loud, just sharper. Fitted blazers. Soft, low heels that didn't squeak down hallways. A new haircut that framed my face instead of hiding it. I didn't want to disappear anymore. I wanted to move unnoticed until it mattered. When I returned to Austin, I didn't go near Emily's neighborhood. I stayed downtown in a corporate rental checking listings over breakfast, attending investor tours like I belonged there. One night, while browsing an auction site, I saw it. The address made my pulse spike. It was their building, the same one Brad and Emily lived in. The owner had defaulted on taxes. It was scheduled for auction in 3 weeks. I stared at the listing for a long time, unsure if fate was handing me something or testing me. I didn't need to think twice. I called my attorney the next morning. We filed the paperwork quietly. No fanfare. Just quiet moves in the right direction. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was reclaiming something they thought they'd taken for good. My place. My power. My silence sharpened into strategy. The auction came and went without noise. Just a few sealed envelopes, a wire transfer, and my name behind a company no one could trace back to me. CS Property Group officially owned the building where I had once stood on the curb with 2 suitcases and no place to go. I didn't rush the changes. The tenants received polite notices about lease reviews and rent adjustments. Standard protocol handled through a property manager who never mentioned me by name. But Brad and Emily's notice was different. Their rent was tripled. Not doubled. Tripled. Market value plus past due fees plus the cost of every silent insult they ever thought wouldn't echo. It wasn't personal. Not really. It was math. It was consequence finally showing up with paperwork. I didn't need to see his reaction to know how he took it. I could picture the vein in his forehead, the way his voice cracked when he shouted. Brad was a man built on the illusion of control, and I had just pulled the rug from under him without ever stepping into the room. 2 days after the letter went out, Emily called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was quiet, unsure. She said something strange was happening. That Brad was furious. That they didn't understand what was going on. She asked if we could talk. I didn't call back. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I wanted her to sit with the silence for once. The same silence I lived in when they turned their backs. This wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure they knew I hadn't forgotten. And I hadn't finished. I saw her near the end of the cereal aisle, standing still in front of a wall of boxed dinners. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, the kind that said she hadn't slept much. Her cart was nearly empty, just a few basics: eggs, rice, off-brand peanut butter. She picked up a box of macaroni, looked at the price, then slowly set it back down. Her phone lit up in her hand. She glanced at it, sighed, and put the phone in her pocket without answering. Her shoulders sagged like something inside her had folded in on itself. I ducked behind a display of paper towels before she could see me. My heart was racing, not from fear, but something closer to grief. I hadn't seen her up close in months, and the girl I raised was buried under shadows I didn't recognize. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep, worn down like someone carrying too much for too long. I watched her from across the checkout lanes, fingers curled around the handle of my basket, wishing I didn't still love her this much. She had been the little girl who used to crawl into bed with me after bad dreams, who'd beg for one more bedtime story, even after I'd already told 3. And now she was here alone in a grocery store, quietly deciding which food she could afford. I stood there frozen long after she left, my cart half full, my throat tight, the hum of the fluorescent lights the only sound I could hear. I had power now more than she ever imagined. But in that moment, watching her walk out with her head down, I didn't feel powerful. I just felt like a mother who missed her daughter. It was just after 7 when I heard the knock. Slow, soft, like someone unsure if they wanted the door to open. Rain tapped gently on the window behind me, and for a second I didn't move. Something in my chest tightened. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't heard from Emily in weeks. I stood up slowly, crossing the room like the floor might give out beneath me. When I opened the door, she was there. Hair-soaked jacket clinging to her like paper, a grocery bag pressed to her chest like it might keep her upright. Her eyes were rimmed red, her lips slightly parted, but no words came out. We stood in silence for a moment that felt longer than it was. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't need to. I stepped aside and she walked past me, slowly dripping water onto the hardwood. She didn't look around the room. She just stood there, wet, shivering, a shell of the girl I remembered. I closed the door behind her, unsure whether to speak, unsure if I even had words that could fill this kind of space. I handed her a towel and watched her sit on the edge of the couch like it wasn't hers to use. Her fingers trembled as she dried her hands. I made tea just to have something to do with my hands, unsure if I was warming the water or trying to calm my own nerves. She didn't say why she had come, and I didn't ask, because something about her silence told me this was the beginning of something, or the end of what we both thought could be ignored forever. We sat across from each other, the steam from our mugs rising in thin, nervous lines. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sound was the gentle clink of ceramic when we lifted our cups and set them down again. Emily stared into her tea like it held the words she didn't know how to say. Her hands were wrapped tight around the mug, like if she let go everything might fall apart. I watched her quietly, heart steady, but not soft. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely there. She said things had gotten worse. That Brad was angry all the time, not just with her, but with everything. The rent hike pushed him over the edge, but the cruelty had been there long before. She admitted she hadn't defended me because she thought keeping the peace was the right thing. That Brad convinced her I'd never leave unless they made it uncomfortable. That she had gone along with it because it was easier than standing up. I said nothing. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I just let her words fall into the space between us and settle like dust no one wanted to touch. That she missed me. That she didn't know how to fix what she'd broken. That she wasn't even sure if I still saw her the same way. I looked at her and didn't answer. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because the weight of what she'd done still sat too heavy in the room. Some wounds don't close with apologies. Some silences are safer than forgiveness. We sat there like that for nearly an hour. Not mother and daughter. Not strangers either. Just two women trying to feel their way back to something that used to feel like love. I let her be there. I gave her warmth, but not the pieces of me she hadn't yet earned back. The room buzzed with quiet impatience, tenants shifting in their chairs, glancing down at printed notices, some sipping from styrofoam coffee cups. The community meeting had been called to discuss building upgrades and rent adjustments, nothing more. At least that's what everyone thought. I arrived early and sat near the back, my hair tied back, blazer buttoned, not a single part of me out of place. No one recognized me, not even Emily, who entered 5 minutes late with Brad storming ahead of her like a man preparing for battle. His voice carried before he even reached his seat. He barked at the property manager, asking who had the nerve to raise rents like this. Demanded names. Said he wasn't leaving until someone explained what was going on. The manager remained calm, told him to wait until the presentation was finished. Brad didn't sit down. Emily stood behind him, eyes down, clutching a folder she never opened. She looked tired, drained in a way makeup couldn't cover. I sat still, fingers resting lightly on my notebook, heart steady, breath slow. The manager began the presentation. Updates on exterior lighting insulation, improvements, plumbing repairs scheduled for the coming month. The usual. Brad tapped his foot loudly, scoffing every few minutes. Then the manager paused, adjusted his glasses, and looked out over the room. He thanked the property's owner for funding all the changes, said the owner was present tonight for questions. And then he nodded toward the back. Toward me. I stood slowly, heels clicking softly against the tile floor. Every head turned. Brad's jaw slackened. Emily blinked like she didn't believe what she was seeing. I walked toward the front of the room, calm as ever, and faced the crowd. My name is Carolyn Sanders. I'm the owner of this building. The silence that followed felt thick enough to stop time. Brad's face twisted in disbelief, then rage. He stepped forward, hands clenched, voice shaking. He said I was playing a game. Said I was trying to ruin them. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I looked him straight in the eye and said this wasn't personal. It was business. I gave this building what it needed, what it deserved. Equal treatment, fair management, accountability. Emily looked from me to Brad, then back to me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. She looked like someone watching a life she barely understood crack open right in front of her. When the meeting ended, tenants came up to ask questions, shake my hand, thank me for repairs. Brad didn't speak. He just stood off to the side, red-faced and hollow-eyed. Emily stayed frozen near the doorway, one hand on the wall like she needed it to hold her up. I didn't wait for them. I left with my head high, my steps measured, my silence intact. Not to prove a point, but to remind them I had never needed noise to hold power. I only needed to be seen. And now they couldn't unsee me. Emily called me 3 days after the meeting. Her voice was steady, but softer than I'd ever heard it. She said she'd left him. She didn't go into detail. just said he followed her to work again, accused her of lying, tore through her bag, looking for something that wasn't there. That night, when he shouted and slammed the bedroom door, she finally saw the truth without excuses. She packed while he was gone the next morning, took only what she could carry, called a friend who had an open couch, and told him he could keep the rest. She said she didn't cry when she walked out. Just breathed for the first time in what felt like years. A week later, she signed a lease on a tiny studio across town with peeling cabinets and a leaky faucet. But it was hers. She started therapy on Tuesdays, joined a community ceramics class on weekends. She sent me a picture of a clay bowl she made with her name scratched into the bottom, like a signature she hadn't written in a long time. Sometimes we talked on the phone. Sometimes we just texted. But there was a new kind of stillness in her voice. Not silence, not guilt. Just something quieter, more real. She never asked to move in. Never brought up the past unless I did. One day, she came over with a bag of groceries and asked if I wanted to cook together. We burned the chicken. We laughed anyway. I didn't say I was proud. I didn't need to. I just passed her the salt like nothing had ever broken. And in that moment, we both understood what it meant to build something slowly. From scratch. On our own terms. I sold the building quietly. No press, no fuss, just a final signature and a wire transfer that cleared by morning. The money sat in my account for 2 weeks before I touched it. I donated half to a women's shelter in East Austin, one that helps mothers get back on their feet. I asked them to name it after my mother. Not for attention, but because I wanted her name to mean safety for someone else too. With the rest, I bought a small home in Cedar Park. Nothing fancy. 2 bedrooms, a garden, outback sunlight in all the right places. It's the kind of home you can exhale in. People think power looks loud, but I've learned it's quiet. It's sleeping through the night with the windows open. It's knowing I could have destroyed, but I chose to build. I don't carry bitterness anymore. I carry peace. And that I've learned is the only kind of wealth that never runs out. If someone makes you feel small just for needing love, remember that their limits are not your worth. The truth has a way of rising even when buried deep. And when it does, you'll realize you were never lost. You were just waiting to come home to yourself.